I'm going to go and start the recording and we can kick off. On this week's office hours, we have a number of updates and announcements from our team before we turn it over for open questions that you may have. Just a quick reminder on cadence, we have this office hours weekly. So if you have any questions, any thoughts that you want to come and discuss with the Semantic Kernel team, we have this on every Wednesday from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time. And then monthly, we have an APAC office hours as well for individuals who are based in the APAC time region. We have those on the second Wednesday of every month from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So just different mechanisms to be able to engage with us. If you do have questions that you want the Semantic Kernel team to answer outside of the office hours, feel free to use GitHub discussions. We go through and monitor and triage and create issues and close out questions on a daily basis. And then for Discord, it's really customer to customer interactions, but we look through and see if there are any good topics in there as well. And so just a couple of other highlights in our docs we've been going through. We'll have additional updates that are coming, connectors, but if you haven't had a chance to go through, we have the AKA link up here. It's always great to look through some of the documentation that details out how to do different items. We have our backlog by bucket, and so our roadmap of really what's coming. And so we have a link that I'll share in chat as well, but it's really great to be able to understand if there is a feature that you're looking for, a different AI service or others of what's coming next. And then finally, I do want to highlight, we have some blog posts out. There's a step-by-step guide to be able to build a dashboard using both Semantic Kernel and Azure Monitor, which is from a fellow Microsoft employee in the Azure CXP org. And so this is a great read to be able to understand further. And then what I want to highlight as well is there's a blog post out around protecting against prompt injection attacks and chat prompts. So I know a lot of you have asked questions around security, and this is a really great way to be able to implement that as well. Before we turn it over to questions, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Roger to share out some updates as well. Roger, I'll stop sharing if you want to share out.
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm going to share really quick. All right. I hope you can see my screen.
Yep, I can see it now.
Yeah, great stuff. So I'm very happy to announce that we just got our latest version with 1.18.2, which now includes OpenAI and Azure OpenAI connectors with the latest version from OpenAI SDK as well as Azure OpenAI SDK. I mentioned in the last week about the new changes there. So we have also the documentations on the migration guides. If you didn't have used the release candidate versions that we released before this one, going to be a GA one. So pretty much there is plenty of guidance on how to make those upgrades and those migration things. It's very small, very simple to do. I can just jump in and bring some of those documentation. So it's very easy to find those. If you go to the Semantic Kernel in any part of this menu and you find for the getting support, we have all of this guidance here for OpenAI, connection migration guide, which we describe all the changes, which are very minimal. We were working towards these two connectors for the last 2 months, really to make this as minimal as a change for the community using Semantic Kernel, and all of the biggest ones and specific changes that needs to be taken are all described in this documentation here. I can probably these ones are shared in the channel as I'm talking here, and you'll be able to kind of go towards these open questions, send questions if you have. But normally any type of errors or situations that you might be facing, you have in this document all the descriptions, what has been changed, what has been deprecated, and so forth. So yeah, I'm very happy to bring those connectors as a GA for usage, and yeah, that's pretty much the all the information that I want to share regarding this new great upcoming for Semantic Kernel. That's it. Any questions?
I'm seeing a couple of questions on other topics in chat we'll get to, but just curious if anyone has specific questions for Roger on this.
Yeah, I'm very happy also to talk about local models. If you have any questions about small models, the advantages of using those, yeah, I'll be working towards connectors for a long time, and yeah, it'll be very helpful.
Great. Well, if there are no questions, we can move to open Q&A, but definitely keep it coming up if you have thoughts. I do see a question in chat from Jose. Jose, do you want to come off of mute? We'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Hi, Roger.
Hey, welcome.
Question. Regarding local models, have you played already with some local model that supports tools like the Olama ones with the new SDK?
That's a great question, and we are at the moment working towards bringing the abstractions for function calling, and with that, we can kind of using those on all of our connectors across pointing, including the Olama ones and the local model ones. So yes, we are looking forward to try to bring that capabilities to the local models. But answering your question, no, I didn't have any local model that was supporting, and yeah, that's something that we are really looking forward to bring as soon as possible to our connectors for the local models.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, as you say, the Olama is supporting that, so that's what I would probably plan to play a bit. I don't know if this weekend or the next one.
Yeah. I heard that Llama 3.1 supports that, and that probably will be my first one to really step into.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks for the question. Any others for Roger as folks are thinking through? If not, we can dive into other questions I'm seeing as well. Thanks so much, Roger. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Great. So going through chat, I'm going to start with the first one I see from Jordan. And Jordan asked around the relationship between semantic kernel and autogen and really when to choose one over the other. And so our autogen repo is from our research team. And so they're going through and testing multi-agent and other work as well, but it's not ready to be deployed into production environments. And so that's really where the pieces of autogen are getting built into semantic kernel. And it's really when I would choose semantic kernel over for production environments and when you're building applications. But autogen is a great way to be able to see some of the multi-agent work and what's coming, and pieces that'll be integrated in semantic kernel as well. Jordan, are there any other questions that you have as well on that?
No, I just wanted to hear about the migration of some of those autogen features into semantic kernel, and if that was going to be kind of the final SDK framework that we should target for agent-based workloads versus any other framework that might come along
Yeah,
from
so
other
the
groups at
semantic kernel
Microsoft.
pieces, we were getting some work integrated in a blog post that shows some of the multi-agent work. And so I'd really use semantic kernel as the final production ready piece that's outside of research to really go and deploy.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and I see we have a hand up. Mark, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So is the general plan then that the autogen is kind of experiments with different things, and then once they're proven out, then it gets incorporated into semantic kernel?
That's a great way to think about it, where it's really in that research stage where it's still going through being tested, and in production, it's then integrated into semantic kernel.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. See a couple of questions in chat. That's a great one for the semantic kernel team to jump into. Are there examples in semantic kernel using structured outputs and how to define them?
I can jump really quick on this one. This is a feature that was just announced in the OpenAI SDK, and we're trying to bring those to the current semantic kernel. So it's a work in progress. But yes, we have plans to bring this as a support for semantic kernel, as well as it's supported to the OpenAI SDK at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Roger. And then I'm seeing a question in chat from Joshua around some of the different content that we have out. We're really getting our documents to have all the latest and greatest and be able to walk individuals through, and then blog posts for any of our updates as well as those pieces. I see there's some conversation from the rest of the team in chat as well. Anything else folks want to add into Joshua's question?
I think the other thing that's coming that's going to be a helpful guide, especially just getting started, is we'll have some kind of what we call metro maps, but it's a step-by-step guide 1 to 10 for each language. So you'll be able to quickly kind of see how to get started, what the syntax looks like, and then we call it a metro map because you can jump off at any time. So it's literally from 1 to 10. So you say, okay, how far do I want to go? Do I want to just stand up a kernel? Or do I want to go all the way to do something of, jump into plugins, jump into memory? So I'll paste a quick screenshot so you can see what that looks like as a sample before we go live with them in the next month or two.
Perfect. Thank you. Just looking through chat, I'm not seeing any other questions. If folks want to come off of mute or raise your hand if you have questions, or feel free to keep them in chat as well. We'd love to hear from you of other questions you may have. Great. So I see one question, I'll get to, and we'll go through our hands raised. There's a question from Ramiro. What is the current state of chunking tools for semantic kernel? I'm particularly interested in some sort of semantic chunking. Yeah, does anyone from the team want to tackle this one?
Yeah, so I get started, and then Mark or Wesley, if you want to jump in. So we have a memory package that we've been talking about for a while that's out, and we're getting that to 1.0. In fact, we did a bit of a deep dive on that last week. I think for chunking in particular, there is a separate project called kernel memory that's out there that does really advanced chunking into different databases, those type of things. We do some basic chunking right now in the new memory package. And then you can also do retrieval from the memory package. So you have a few options. So from Semantic Kernel, we have our new package that'll help you get started of putting things into a vector store. And then if you want to go further, things like kernel memories, you can want to take a look at to see, how you can do that at scale and do different really methods of doing that, and then writing your own code to do your own chunking if you want to.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Evan. Really appreciate it. And I'm not seeing more questions in chat, so I'm going to go through some of the hands we have raised. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. Ion, if you want to come off of mute first.
Yeah, sure. So I have a two-step question. Basically, let's assume we load up our chat history from the memory cache. Which is, in your opinion, the best way to address the context limit? How to handle the limit of the context within the chat history, or to clear it in order to maximize the interaction from the agent to the user. And the second question is related to the planner. I saw within the documentation you're planning to discontinue them, the handlebars and the stepwise planner. So you're advising for the usage of the function calling. How could we actually chain all of those functions together, which is the best way in your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I'll tackle a little bit of the second one and then turn it over to the team for some of your questions around the chat history. For function calling, for stepwise planner, we really are recommending that you move to automatic function calling just because it's the latest and greatest and is baked into a lot of the different models as well. And so we'd really recommend that you go through that process. Evan just linked in chat as well. Thanks, Evan, to the Future of Planners blog that really details what we see moving forward. For the handlebars planner, we really see it being able to be moving forward with automatic function calling, be able to have some work with that as well. In terms of chaining together, I think a lot of that great work you'll see in automatic function calling. Again, if you have a specific scenario, we're happy to dive into that a bit further. For your first question, I'm going to turn it over to the semantic kernel team. Wesley, didn't know if this would be a good one to dive into as well.
Sorry, Sophia, what was the question there?
No worries. Do you mind repeating your first question that you had around the chat history and the memory with it?
Yes, so I think my understanding of the question is that it was how to manage the kind of like the chat history and just make sure that you're not kind of like it doesn't grow too large or whatever, and like you're including the most relevant information. So I mean that it is something we've been asked about a number of times, and we have some work going on to kind of like look at how you would automatically truncate the chat history and start to remove redundant content. Yeah, we don't have anything concrete that, or at least that I'm aware of at the moment, right? But it is something we're working on, like, and I think we can make it a topic for a future community call meeting then and provide some guidance.
Definitely, I'm just taking note. We can definitely circle back on that. Thanks for the question. And I see we have another hand up. Mark, do you want to go and come off of mute?
Yes, thank you. So I've been I'm trying to incorporate a natural language to SQL plugin into sort of a chat app repository that leverages semantic kernel. I'm trying to use the planner mode to do that. And so I guess I was wondering if any folks on the call, I've seen some accelerators for creating NL to SQL with C# on semantic kernel. I haven't seen many using Python. I wanted to see if anybody had any experience with that or had any either resources or general tips for creating an NL to SQL plugin using semantic kernel.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in the first part and then let's see if Evan or Wesley are on. They're not. Maybe Ben can take the other piece. So one thing to think about is security. So generally, like for POCs or fun prototypes, NL to SQL is great. It's fun to see. For production workloads, though, really a bad idea because the agent, you can say, hey, can you drop all the tables? And the agent says, yes, I can. Drop tables, boom, your database is gone. So generally what you want to do is for NL to SQL, do more like NL to SQL view or to a stored proc, and tell the agent what your views are and what the parameters are for those. So that way it's read only and you only get information that you need back versus a full SQL query. So that's just general best practices. Don't let the agent do full SQL statements. It will give your users way more permission than they should, and they can do terrible things by just asking it to do those things. So that's just overall from a security aspect of NL to SQL. Ben, do you have any guidance for Python pieces with NL to SQL that you've seen?
I have not seen any. The C# implementation that we have, that's all open source. I think it's in the kernel memory repo, actually. I think if you took a look at that, you would see that it's not actually all that complicated what it's doing. You could probably port it to Python relatively easily.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, that's a great point about the permissions there. And yeah, I think I'm aiming to sort of either really narrowly scope to a specific type of query and just kind of plug in like one variable into the input, or like you said, doing some kind of a read-only approach. So thank you.
Yeah, I
That's
think
helpful.
yeah, that's a good idea. I think you could also try to sort of scope it to function calls, right? Like you can use function calling to only kind of let it do certain things on the database, and certainly read only mode.
Great. Do you know that C# repo, is that using the current sort of like planner concept, or is it using one of the older um,
I don't think it was
versions?
using any planners actually. I think that was written like over a year ago at this point. So that may have been before we even had planners that work very well. So I think it's probably just pure semantic kernel
Okay, but
prompting.
maybe some prompts or something I could
Yeah.
take from there. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for the question. I'm seeing in chat a couple of good questions and points from Jordan. Jordan, would you mind coming off of mute for the recording just to elaborate a bit further on some of your questions?
Sure. So I've had a couple of requests from customers where they want to start building these more complicated agent-based workflows with multiple agents that try to work together to solve tasks. And so some of the common issues are being able to scale out and scale in automatically, being able to have multiple agents working together on the same chat, and also being able to have multiple chats going at the same time. So if they want to do like a bulk processing request, the agents and the system prompts are the same for every one, but they pass in different input, and they want the agents to reason over all of those different inputs in parallel and then come up with the final answer. So that was what some of my questions in the chat are about.
No, it's a great scenario. I really appreciate you detailing. I see that a lot of it has been responded to in chat, but just wanted to make sure there's nothing else the team wanted to add. I see Ben, you came off of mute. Was there something you wanted to add as well?
Is Chris on the call?
I'm not
Let's see.
seeing Chris on.
Evan, do you happen to know for Python, like, do we have a sort of like a thread mode where you can pass in different chat histories to the same agent instance and it will work on them
It looks like Evan
separately?
Matson's not on the call either.
What was that?
Evan Matson's also not on the call.
Oh, he's not. Oh, shoot, sorry. Okay, let me take a look at that further and I can get back to you.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Jordan. See another good question from Joshua around the relation of semantic kernel and kernel memory. Joshua, do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah. Are you hearing me?
Yes, perfect. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. As I wrote, what I wanted to know is what is the relation between semantic kernel and kernel memory as of now, because it's not really clear to me by looking at the source code if semantic kernel is taking off from kernel memory and slowly integrating some of the stuff from it, or they are two completely separate projects, and we need to take all the code from both and make our project from both of the source codes. Because by looking at the semantic kernel code, I often see some similarities in the code, so I just wanted to know that, and what are the main similarities. And on that side note, if it's more suitable to use kernel memory to manage the case of going out of context in the chat history, or having a buffer for it, or whatever the strategies for that are, and which are the best ones.
Perfect. So I'll take the first part, and then Wesley, Mark, do you want to take the second part? So for the first one, kernel memory and semantic kernel are not related, although we sit next to each other. So that's probably why you see some of the code that looks the same. What we do with kernel memory is that team will go and take, like right now, the new memory package that the team's been working on for semantic kernel is being implemented back into kernel memory. So you see that pretty soon, if not already. So there's really the foundation of kernel memory, the orchestrator there is semantic kernel, just like we see with a lot of other projects and teams. So that's what you'll see. What we'll do is certainly, if there's good learnings, we're trying to make the abstraction layer on top of all the SDKs that are out there. So that way other projects and products can take advantage of semantic kernel and then build the really complex pieces on top. So that's what you're seeing on the kernel memory there, is taking a lot of our abstraction pieces like our new memory package and then leveraging that to do chunking and the other pieces. And then probably turn it over to Mark or Wesley about, what are we doing next for this?
Yeah, maybe something to add first is just that kernel memory probably sits a little bit higher in the stack than the semantic kernel memory abstractions, in that it adds extra functionality, like being able to ingest specific files, chunk them, and basically orchestrate the whole ingestion pipeline for content into a vector store. Whereas semantic kernel is essentially an SDK. So you can build that sort of functionality with semantic kernel, but it's not a service that you can just provide a configuration for, which is what kernel memory is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then just a quick one with regard to kind of like, managing the chat history and implementing different strategies for that. Like we don't have any, we leave that as at the moment as kind of an exercise for the application to developer to come up with their own strategy and figure out what best suits their application. But we will kind of put together some samples just to show some common strategies that you can use and that you can adapt to your own needs.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See, we have another hand raised. Anthony, do you want to come off of mute?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I have a question about indexing my data. So I use the built-in function save information to index my data into the Azure AI search. So what I did is I have about a couple hundred of PDF documents, and each document had about between 15 to 20 pages. So what I did is I used that built-in function save information to index my data. Is that the best practice, or do we need to chunk it down?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I see Wesley's coming off of mute. Wesley, if you want to dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the consumption side of how you want to consume this data. If you, it's good to think about like, the cost of feeding very large chunks of data into the into the LLM. There's token costs involved. If you want to reduce the cost, you may want to have smaller chunks so that, and if let's say your data is it's going to depend on the type of data, I suppose, and how it's structured as well. But ultimately, if the data is valuable in smaller snippets, then being able to find them in smaller snippets is useful from a cost perspective. You can, of course, feed in multiple pieces of content as well when you do. I assume you're doing this for RAG. So when you're doing RAG, you might say, okay, well, I'll grab 10 items or 20 items that are smaller with a certain minimum relevancy. So you might end up, having fewer than 10 anyway if you have that relevancy limit in there as well. So yeah, I there's probably not a simple answer here. It's more around, what is your scenario? What is your cost base that you want to look at there, and so on.
Okay, thank you. So chunk it out. It will save me more money.
Yeah, and really, I mean, there's a trade-off there. Of course, the more data you feed into the LLM, the more detailed your responses are going to be. But you may be feeding a lot of irrelevant data into the LLM if you are passing in, very large pages, and it's only maybe a paragraph that is interesting to answer the question that the user has.
Okay, so for the effectiveness of the response, is there any difference between feeding the large data or the chunking data?
It really depends on your question, I suppose. If the thing that you want to answer the user on, and it's not really an exact science, I suppose, in that, let's say the answer can be answered well using 3 different paragraphs, and you're using paragraphs to chunk, and each paragraph has relevant information, assuming that the semantic search matches all 3 paragraphs, then that's great, because you'll find all 3. That you'll feed all 3 into the LLM, and you'll get a really good response. Assuming that it doesn't match it, or it matches only one of the paragraphs, then the response will be poor that you get out. So, in that case, you could obviously expand the size of what you're passing in, just in case, but I don't think that's probably the best strategy ultimately.
Yeah,
because
quality.
Go ahead.
Good. Yeah, so quality is going to be your best friend here. So it's not necessarily about how much to pass in, it's about getting the best quality. To do that, especially since you're using Azure AI Search, you want to use a re-ranker. The quality is, I can't remember, it's like 30 or 40% higher if you use that. So it does 1 pass with vector, 1 pass with search, takes those 2, combines them back together to figure out the highest quality. So you can set what percentile you want from a quality bar. So you'd want to do that in Azure AI Search. And to Wesley's point too, like chunking and even the cost now is near 0 for the embedded models. So make sure you're doing things like high overlap. This is one of the things that OpenAI does too, where you can do, maybe like 40 or 50% overlap between the paragraphs. And that way you'll get, if you get half of one and the other half of the other, having that overlap is going to help to when it finds the quality answers, it'll get those in, put them into the context window, and more likely get you what you want.
Yeah, the reason I ask because I experiment with some small document, PDF document, and I break it out into chunk using paragraph. So what I found is that when I feed in the entire PDF document, I get a better response compared to chunk it out into the paragraph, because one page have like 4 paragraphs, and the middle paragraph doesn't mention about the subject that I ask. So they opt out the middle paragraph, just return the first and the last paragraph in the response. So
yeah, the other thing you can do is if your PDFs, let's say you have a variety of PDFs and they're all different things, like maybe it's financial reporting or whatever, you can put tags on that too in Azure AI Search and tag, okay, this is this type of document or that type, and then use that too to query to make sure you get better results. But you're right, if the docs are small enough and they fit in the context window and you only need one, absolutely, yeah, push the whole thing in and you'll get the best results. But if you have tens of thousands of documents and they're changing all the time, and then that's where you're really gonna, your chunking strategy and your retrieval strategy is going to be super important.
Okay.
The other thing too that customers have done, it's a little bit more, but again, tokens are almost free at this point. Some people will do their chunks and then send that chunk over to an LM to do a summary of the chunk, along with kind of a summary of the doc or the section of the doc. And you can put that as a kind of a summary header on the top of it also. So that may be another strategy if you want to get to very, very high quality.
Okay, so you mentioned about tagging when I chunk it down. So each PDF document use the same tag?
Well, if it's the same type, right? So if I have, let's say, a 10K or something, if I'm in finance, I could say this is a 10K document, and then when someone searches, hey, I need to find information about forward-looking strategies from Microsoft, you can use that and say, oh, okay, I know those are all 10Ks, great. I'm gonna search only these files that have this tag, and then I'm gonna filter those down, right? Versus searching everything that you got from a SharePoint site or blob storage or something.
Great,
That makes
thank you.
sense.
Great, thanks for the question. I see we have another hand raised. Raj, do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah, thanks. And it's the previous question that I saw some. What is the volatile memory? I saw some examples of with Phi3 where you could dynamically build a volatile memory with the content and then ask questions that are grounded on that content. Is that part of the kernel memory SDK?
Great. I see we have Wesley on. Wesley, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So you can certainly build something like that using Semantic Kernel, but I think what you're talking about is really a solution, and Semantic Kernel is an SDK. So there's different components in there that you can use to build that kind of solution. For example, there's the memory component which you can use to store. You can vectorize your data, your textual data, and store it and retrieve related textual data using vector search. Then you can use the AI connectors to summarize that data together once you've retrieved related information using memory, using vector search in memory, and whatever you get back, you can use the AI services to summarize that to answer the user. And ultimately, that's how these solutions work as well. Somebody asks a question, you turn it into a vector, you do a vector search on the data that you have in the memory, you take out the results, and you basically pass it to the LLM to take all of that grounding information and answer the question that the user has. So all of the components are there, but ultimately how you put that together is up to you.
Yeah, I know that I'm not talking about the vector database, but this one was just using kernel memory where you dynamically add some content. It could be coming from, let's say, a vector database. Let's say you took the thing and then you put it in a virtual memory and you can flush the memory, right? So let's say if you want to answer a question, you have done your vector DB search and you got the things, and now you use that result to dynamically create the prompt using the kernel memory. I thought that was pretty neat. I think that's using Phi3, also the small language model. So what's confusing in the previous question is sometimes we say semantic kernel and sometimes we say kernel memory. And are there some kind of a clarity between when and how to use it, or things are somewhere I read kernel memory is the future, or so when and how to use these two things?
So I don't know, Evan, do you want to take this one or?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not an easy piece, right? So it is complicated. Like it's not one size fits all for this. It's kind of depends on your need, what you're trying to do. Yeah, there's not an easy, just out of the box solution for this one.
Yeah, and maybe there's a couple of things that you were asking. One of them was around storing things in memory, I suppose, and building a some in-memory store that you can kind of throw away. There is something like that in Semantic Kernel as well, a component that you can use, volatile memory store. It's something that we're also building in the new memory package that we're working on, where you can essentially just spin up a in-memory vector store and add all of your data to that and do queries on it, using various similarity algorithms. So we will have something similar as well, and as we mentioned earlier, kernel memory is something that is more of a solution rather than an SDK. There's a service there that you can configure. You basically type in your configuration about how you want to store things, and it can basically go and fetch documents for you. You basically point it to the documents that you want, and it can process them and upload everything and so on. Whereas Semantic Kernel is more of a lower level SDK that you can use to build this sort of thing yourself. I don't know if that helps.
So you think that the kernel memory is a much more like a component, right? Whereas the SDK, the semantic kernel SDK, gives you a lot more from a developer capability that kernel memories, but some of them already incorporated. And are they based on the same core semantic kernel libraries?
Yes, yeah. So kernel memory is almost the application layer. Like we are the building blocks, and then someone has built an app on top of it to do this particular thing, which is chunking of files, any different types of files into any different types of vector stores. And again, we see this a lot. It's like any other Copilot almost, right? Like the Copilots that are built on top of semantic kernel. They do specific things. We are the underlying tech to go orchestrate those calls to the different systems. So same thing there with the kernel memory.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Raj. Really appreciate it. I see 2 questions in chat from Steve. Steve, do you want to come off of mute and elaborate a bit? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. With the auto function calling and the chat completion model, when I've got a system that I think we're nearing probably 20, 30 APIs that are available, and those are kind of under different groups. When I pass that off to the semantic kernel, are you guys creating a plan similar to kind of the planner under the hood that can call several of these APIs, in series or in parallel, and then executing that with the LLM one step at a time? Or is the list of the APIs and the user's question going up to the LLM, and then the LLM, like OpenAI's models, are then creating the plan and executing? Can you guys talk a little bit about kind of how that works under the hood?
So I'll take that. So the way how it works is that unless you're using semantic kernel planners, semantic kernel doesn't do any orchestration. And semantic kernel delegate the orchestration to LLM. So LLMs basically are orchestrators. LLM deciding on the execution plans, which functions to call and in which sequence. Regarding your other questions, whether those functions are invoked in parallel or sequentially, at the moment, they are called sequentially, but we are working on the feature allowing you to decide on the execution sequence, whether to execute it sequentially or in parallel. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. So each step, it can go grab an API, get information, say it's a vector search or a database search, and come back with that data, and then use that as an input to the following API call, correct?
Yes, it's done by the LLM itself, basically. LLM is looking at the list of the functions you've advertised and then deciding on the execution sequence. And if LLM think that if LLM think that it needs to go to database and get some information from database first, it will just communicate it to semantic kernel, and semantic kernel will invoke the function for you, then serialize the results and send these results back to LLM. And LLM will see, oh, well, I've called the functions to get the information from database. Here are the results. So next function is update database, or send, I don't know, call any other functions with the results of the first function call.
Got it. Yeah, the system we have is working really, really well. I'm just kind of curious as to, like, is there a do you guys have any recommendations or go by white papers or anything that kind of describe, what is the best way to detail these APIs? I know everything's kind of structured on an open API standard, but how many or too many APIs? Sometimes it may call the wrong one and then course correct and call a different one, which is great. But I've definitely had to spend a lot of time on kind of playing with what properties to give, to allow to be searchable in these APIs. Are there any type of like white papers or anything you guys can point us to, or best practices in that regard?
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
We're going to release a white paper regarding the new function calling model, where we are going to describe the way functions are called, the new function call content types, the way how you can specify whether to invoke functions in parallel or sequentially. So that's coming.
Yeah, and then the other thing, just as some best practices, one is make sure you have telemetry turned on, and that way you can go watch and see which one got called. Where that'll help you is it's really mostly based on the description. So what description are you putting into each plugin? That's what the LLMs use. If you're having the LLM do, it's the dynamic planning like we've been talking about here with function calling. So if you're really generic on what the plugin API does, it's not going to help the LLM. If you're really specific, okay, use this one to do this type of call for this type of scenario, you'll get much better results. And then if you have two, let's say you have one plugin that opens accounts and a second one that opens accounts for existing customers, tell it both. So say this one does this, and do negative prompting on it too. Oh, and it's not used for blah, blah, blah. And do the same thing. And you'll probably start to get much higher return of getting the right calls every time.
Oh, that's interesting. So negative prompting helps as well, almost like stable diffusion prompts.
That's right, especially if you have two things that are very similar. Like if you have two APIs that call to get customer database calls, you need to specify which one is for what.
Got it. And now, does the meta prompt also play a role into this as well, into the LLM choosing which one? Like, can we say, hey, here's a list of API calls, and here's some more information about scenarios on when to use one versus the other? Or is it strictly just off the description decorator property?
The description is probably your best bet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate the questions. See a couple of questions in chat from Jose. Jose, do you want to come off of mute?
Sorry, I do not have any further question.
In chat, I saw you had a couple of questions. Just didn't know if you wanted to elaborate for the recording, and we can dive into them as well.
Which questions did I put? I don't recall. I wrote quite a few things. This memory story. If there is any plan to implement knowledge graph support, this is kind of what GraphRag is implementing.
Yeah, Wesley can jump in, but as long as like with GraphRag, has API calls, they're defined. That should be just a normal call for us, and then it'll do its GraphRag magic in the back end. So I think that should be doable. Wesley, any
yeah.
thoughts there?
So ultimately, we were actually just talking about it a couple of days ago, and we're working at the moment on building a layer that allows more flexible RAG scenarios, as well as, around generating plugins using various sources that can be used for RAG. And those sources would include multiple things. Now, this is mostly Mark working on this, but ultimately, some of those sources are search engines, some of them are vector stores, and I think at that level we would also want to support GraphRag, as another input, so that you should be able to just say, okay, well, I've got a thin wrapper around some GraphRag source that I can query, and that serves as an input into Semantic Kernel, where we can generate the plugin for that source and be able to easily advertise that to the LLM and do searches on GraphRag as well using that mechanism. And it would be the same mechanism as whether you're using vector stores or using a search engine or whatever.
Oh, cool.
That's the way I'm thinking about it. But yeah, we need to dig into it more on our side as well.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
On that aspect, I have a following question, if I may. Can I, Sophia?
Yeah, go for it, Jose.
Yeah. What about bringing planners again in? I know that you are so focusing, okay, let's do everything with function calling because this is what is working, but they can only do so much. So as far as I understand, they depend on the model. So it has kind of a self-reflection on what should I do with some reflection on it. So kind of a meta prompt in the models, which behind the scenes, mostly they are agents because they have quite an interesting prompt with this implemented. But they can only do so much. And there's, for example, it was like 2-3 weeks ago in a session, I saw LATs, right? These language agent tree search, which depends on a knowledge graph that in this case, it's building on its own, right? And I know that Semantic Kernel is going or has the plan to go for agents as a graph as well. So these can also come together. I know this is quite maybe in the future, so 3-4 months ahead, but seems to be working really, really well, this LATs approach. I can put some links if you want.
Yeah, I think we've seen function calling work the best. There's certainly scenarios where you, at least in the short term, where you can't do function calling. Maybe you're using like a local model or a small model that doesn't support it yet. We are starting to see more of the very small models support function calling. We think that's probably going to continue. So we will have the code out there for people that want to do sort of write your own function calling, which we called planners before function calling was a thing. That may be okay in certain scenarios with things like chain of thought and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the quality and the response is just so much faster that we've seen. The quality is high and much faster using the models, and we think that'll keep getting better. Well, they'll keep training these particular endpoints for function calling to do better and better and better over time. But you're right, in the short term, like that's why we still have the old ones that way in case people want to.
Maybe I did not explain. This LATS model is a lot better, but it's slower because it creates a tree explore set of actions. So it's meant for scenarios like, okay, you want your LLM model to play chess or to play Go, right? Or to maybe define a strategy for your company, right? So it builds a different set of actions and acts kind of a deep neural network inside and driven by an LLM. I will share the chat and a couple of links so you can see, but it's definitely another approach when you need a higher level of thinking to define an action to just an immediate, oh, I want to use this skill and this other and this other. And I agree with you that function calling is fantastic. It does things very quick, but it can do up to certain very easy and clear tasks.
Yeah, we'll make some announcements in a couple of weeks about some higher level things on top of the SDK that are going to be coming out that I think help with some of those pieces too.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. I'm not seeing any others in chat. I know we have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone else want to come off of mute? Are there any questions folks have? If not, we'll give it a minute or two more in case anyone's typing or coming off of mute to see. But if not, we can wrap up a little bit earlier if there are no other questions folks have. Great. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll go and end today's office hours. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. If you have any questions in the meantime for the Semantic Kernel team, feel free to post them out in GitHub discussion, and we'll triage them in between the weekly office hours we have. But just want to thank everyone again for joining in.